Welcome back to TarHeelIllustrated.com. And if you're watching on our YouTube channel, Tar Heel Illustrated, I'm THI staff writer Jacob Turner. And joining me for the THI preview podcast is THI publisher Andrew Jones. Andrew, it's been a while since we've been on here talking football. Obviously, it's Carolina's game against Charlotte getting canceled a couple weeks back. Carolina has not played since their season opening win over Syracuse and Chapel Hill on September 12th. But the Heels travel up to Boston College this weekend for a 3:30 p.m. kickoff at Alumni Field. AJ, first thing we got to talk about, which I've already mentioned a little bit, is obviously that time off that Carolina's had between the Syracuse game and the start of the Boston College game. It's going to be exactly 3 weeks since Carolina's played football. You asked Mack Brown about it during his midweek press conference after practice. He discussed it a little bit. But in your opinion, AJ, does the time off hurt Carolina? Or does it help them, especially when you consider that Boston College has played 2 games now, 2-0 right now? Do you think that time off is going to hurt Carolina or kind of maybe help them out, refresh them a little bit?
The cop-out answer would be, well, we'll find out.
Yeah.
But kind of like us, as we're doing our first preview pod in 3 weeks. It's like our first one ever now. We're having a season opener with preview pods. Mac has stressed going back to last week. It's like we're restarting. This is a new season opener. The players have said it. Tamon Fox said Tuesday that he senses that the team is a bit antsy, like you would be going into an actual opener. I asked Mac about it, as you alluded to, Wednesday morning, and Mac said, yeah, that's the case. He sees it as well, and that's not a bad thing, and it's pretty normal in sports. So the positives of the layoff would be that they're pretty healthy. They're going to find out during warm-up Saturday if Josh Ezeudu could go. I think it's really important that he does play. Mm-hmm. He's certainly their most versatile offensive lineman, and he might be their best offensive lineman. He's naturally starting left guard. And it's not that Ed Montilus and Kieran Johnson didn't do very well in the opener. They were inconsistent, but the line was inconsistent. But Ezeudu is just on a different level. And the versatility factor where he can spell other guys. And, you know, they talked in the preseason about not playing Brian Anderson, 85 snaps a game. Well, he played all the snaps right up until the very end when they put in the reserve. So they need Ezeudu. They need to be able to sit those guys a couple of, at least one series to keep them fresher. Sam Howell said the timing has not been affected. In fact, he said, and I'm paraphrasing, look, I don't throw to all the guys during the games. I don't throw to them more than a couple times if I do. But in practice, I throw to them a bunch of times every day in practice. We run all of our different routes, so our timing shouldn't be affected at all. So I don't think that'll be much of an issue. The area where I think that they may hurt the most, not having played the Charlotte game, Jacob, is cleaning up some of the mess. You would have wanted, if you're a Carolina fan, you would have wanted to see a more consistent and higher level effort from the offensive line than you did against Syracuse. And you want to see some of those mistakes on special teams cleaned up, especially some of the flags they had that were called on some of the younger kids. So they didn't have that opportunity. They addressed it, but they put games to bed quickly and move on. So I think those are some of the areas you need to look at Saturday to see, okay, are they like an opener in this area? Because if they are, it could be costly, because I'm not convinced they're going to go in there and blow out Boston College like a lot of people are for some reason. It's good. They're going to need to do well in all those other areas of the game in order to have a chance to win.
Exactly. Andrew, let's focus on Carolina offensively and kind of what they need to do to be successful on Saturday. I know Boston College is 2-0 right now. Big win over Duke, which Duke's looked pretty bad this year in their season opener. So,
real bad.
Yeah, I mean, when you see it on paper the first week, when you don't know much about the Duke team, you're like, that's a good win for Boston College, I think. And now you kind of see where Duke's at right now, and you're like, oh, maybe it's not. And then you look last weekend when, Boston College played Texas State, and I think they had to come from, 14 behind at one point or something like that. They had to come from behind to win that game, and ended up winning it on the last-second field goal. Focusing on Carolina's offense, so I guess we'll be focusing on Boston College defensively, but what do you think Carolina needs to do as an offense? I mean, they look really good in that Syracuse game, especially in the second half, put up 31 points. But what do you think Carolina needs to do offensively to be successful on Saturday against BC?
Well, it begins up front, like I was talking about a minute ago. They need to be consistent up front. They got to be able to run the ball well. I mean, they are a team with, as Mac told us Wednesday, that might be his best room, that running back room. because Javonte Williams is possible NFL guy. Michael Carter is going to get a great opportunity to play at the next level. And they're both outstanding college running backs, and they both know what they're doing. They have a lot of experience. They run well inside. They run well going wide. Michael caught 6 passes against Syracuse, so they got to be able to run the ball and use their backs well. And if they consistently are able to do that, that's going to set up that over-the-top stuff, take top off the defense stuff that Sam has been so good at. But he didn't complete a pass for more than 20 yards downfield in the Syracuse game, which is the first time in his career that has actually happened. So I think they need to be physical up front. They need to establish the run, and they need to protect Sam. In Boston College's first 2 games, they have 7 sacks and 22 quarterback hurries. So they forced opposing quarterbacks to move, and it affected what they were doing significantly 29 times, and that's pretty considerable. They faced against a kid who's been around a lot at Duke and Chase Bryce, and the offensive system they went up against Texas Tech is pretty much the same thing that UNC runs. The offensive coordinator, or Texas State, excuse me, the offensive coordinator there was wide receiver coach for Longo at Ole Miss. So BC's seen a little bit of what Carolina does. They obviously hadn't seen the athletes, and maybe not. They haven't seen the McKeithans and Tuckers of the world up front, but it's going to be a challenge. But I think if Carolina can run the ball effectively on first down and give Sam opportunities to really let it go, they have a chance to post some pretty good numbers in this game.
Yeah, I think offensively, I don't have as many question marks about the offense going into this game. I think defensively, I'm a little bit more curious to see how things happen in this game. And the main reasons for that is, I mean, since Carolina's played, obviously Miles Woolfolk is no longer on the team due to grades and all that stuff when they went in his graduate program. Jaquarius Conley is now moved to that starting nickel spot, a true freshman. You got Trey Morrison, a guy who really – I mean, Jay Bateman and Mac Brown have talked about how versatile he is across that secondary. But when it comes down to it, he's moved back to that starting safety position. He's not a guy that's played safety a lot, if at all, at Carolina so far. AJ, defensively, what do you think Carolina needs to do to be successful against BC? And do you kind of agree with me that you maybe have a little bit more question marks and are more interested to see how this defense performs when you just consider some of the changes they have, particularly in that secondary?
Well, there's no doubt. Morrison got a lot of reps at safety in August. And now they've had a couple of weeks, and I think he'll be fine there. And I'm not convinced he's going to play 70 snaps at safety. I think we'll see him at nickel. And they need Cam Kelly to continue to progress. Mac told us Wednesday that Patrice Renee and Cam Kelly take a little longer to kind of get where they need to be in their injury recoveries. And part of that is a byproduct of not being around and everything being shut down back in March. But they can get Cam Kelly on the field and get him to where he was the day he started against Clemson last year. That will give them a little bit more flexibility with Trey. I think Conley, it's going to be really interesting. I think when Jeremiah Gemmel told us last week that for a few weeks in August and maybe even early September that Conley kept looking to him like, okay, well, like making sure what he does. I think I'm supposed to do this. I'm supposed to do that, asking it more like a question. And he said recently he started telling him what he was going to do. And nobody's concerned about the physical aspect of playing football for Jaquarius Conley. It's all been the mental side because he's a true freshman who's played 23 snaps at nickel against Syracuse. He played 22 special teams plays, been on the field for 45 plays. Now he's going to start on the road in Chestnut Hill in an ACC game. And someone's going to have to deal with Hunter Long, the tight end for Boston College, and he's going to maybe be matched up with Conley every once in a while. So that's going to be really interesting to see how he handles that. BC's offense has not been impressive at all, except they've been better in the second halves of both games. They pulled away from Duke after a sluggish first 2.5 quarters or so. That was similar to Carolina's win over Syracuse. And then last week against Texas State, they scored 10 points in the last minute and a half, a minute and 11 seconds or whatever it was. They got it done, and they got the win. So they only had 297 yards in the game, but they also have a new quarterback, a new system, and lots of new stuff. So they've seen growth. So Carolina's going to have to play well defensively. They're going to have to force Jokovic to move and give the defense a chance to create some turnovers. Mac was disappointed in a number of turnovers against Syracuse. I think they forced one. And Bateman's defense with all those athletes, they got to do better than that. They got to force more stuff, more turnovers than that.
Absolutely. AJ, last thing I want to ask you before we move on to the next segment. You talk about this all the time. It's one of the first things you kind of talked about when I came on a couple of years ago and started covering both basketball and football team. But you judge a team based on the expectations that they have set out, that they have said. Now, it's different with basketball and football. Obviously, it has been for the past few years. Obviously, Carolina's goal this year, which they've stated, is to compete for an ACC championship. You're going up to Boston College, first road game, a lot of different things, new travel requirements, Carolina having not played in a little bit. But can we both agree that is this a game that Carolina, for their set expectations, they should be beating the Boston College team? Is this a game where Carolina just simply needs to go up there and win? Or from your standpoint, when you're trying to judge this team, if they go up there and just kind of sneak out a win, is that kind of a bad look for them? What are your kind of thoughts on how Carolina needs to go up here and play against Boston College?
The objective is to win.
Mm-hmm.
So if you win, Boston College kicked a field goal with 7 seconds left to beat Texas State.
Wins
you look at the standings, they're 2-0.
Exactly.
Not 1-1. They're not 2-0 with an asterisk. Mm-hmm. And you've got, when you're North Carolina, and including the Syracuse game, if you go back to the Thursday night at Duke in 2016, they went into that game, they were 7-2, and if they just win that night, they're in position to go back to the ACC championship game. Since that night, North Carolina is 13-27.
Yeah.
So a win is a win. You take it, you put it in your pocket, you smile, you celebrate, and then you worry about fixing stuff that needs to be fixed so you can be better situated to win the next week. That being said, I think if this team gives up 500 yards to a Boston College club that's averaging about 340 after playing Duke and Texas State, I think that would be cause for concern. If Sam doesn't take the top off of the defense at all and they're just dinking and dunking and they just can't get guys free for whatever reason, that might be a cause for concern. If there are more breakdowns in the kicking game, that might be a cause for concern. But the number one thing is to win. It's a conference game and it's a road game. And it's against a program that has, even though Steve Adazio was fired, they've still been decent and they still cause problems for people. And this is the first road game for these guys. It's weird travel protocols because of COVID. Some of the guys were joking about how they're playing. A lot of players in this team never been on a plane before.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So I think right now, win, build steam, and get better. There's nothing like winning and needing to improve when you win. It's a lot easier sales pitch for a coach to say, okay, guys, we do A, B, and C. We're going to be even better. And that's what this program needs. Like I said, 13-27 in their last 40 games. And a lot of those wins were over FCS and the ODUs of the world. So a road win in the ACC, North Carolina football should be glad, take it, and run with it.
Yeah, I mean, a road win in the ACC, especially with, like you mentioned, with just kind of how the past few years have gone for this program. And the team will take it and get the heck out of Boston as quick as possible.
No doubt.
So absolutely. Well, AJ, we've got Deana's Dandies, a very special segment, one of my favorite segments that we've come up with on our YouTube channel over the past few months. I always enjoy Deana coming on here and talking to her little Deana's Dandies. So without further ado, Deana's Dandies coming up next for y'all.
Hello, welcome to Deana's Dandies. This week, the Tar Heels travel up to Boston College, and we're going to take a look at former North Carolina prep stars that are playing for the Eagles. There's only one on this year's team because Boston College roster is predominantly made up of kids in the northeastern part of the United States, but they do recruit national and even maybe international. I believe I saw a kid from Canada. So the one that I want to talk about today, and he's a good one, John Lamont. He's a linebacker for the Eagles. He is a graduate, so he's been up Chestnut Hill several years, and he's a very key member of this Eagle team. John Lamont was a standout at Eastern Alamance High School near Burlington. He played basketball and football. He was a tremendous quarterback and athlete for the Eagles. Ironically, he stayed an Eagle. So John Lamont, multiple school records for Eastern Alamance, played in the Shrine Bowl. So he is definitely a kid. Number 28 for Boston College. Keep your eye on that former North Carolinian. So only one kid on the roster, but I'm going to add that there is a link between UNC and Boston College. Former North Carolina Tar Heel player Joe Daly, who transferred in from Nebraska, he is a coach on the Boston College coaching staff. He coaches wide receiver. As you know, Daly was a quarterback, and then he's transitioned to play wide receiver his last year. So it's going to be interesting to see Coach Daly on the Boston College sideline. And lastly, I always kind of look at a kid, maybe one of my favorites that growing up that I watched. And a few years ago, that was Harold Landry, a defensive end that went up to Boston College and had a stellar career for the Boston College Eagles. He got drafted. He's currently with the Tennessee Titans. He was a tremendous player at Pine Forest down in the Fayetteville area. And I just wanted to mention him since there was just only one North Carolina connection to the home state. Check me out next week when we have plenty of other kids to talk about from North Carolina.
Awesome stuff there from Deana on her weekly Deana's Dandies. Always enjoy her segment talking about the former North Carolina players in the state that are currently out and about across the country playing football for other teams. AJ, I got to ask you, I know you covered Joe Daly, who Deana mentioned in her segment. What do you remember about him? I have a few memories about him from his time playing quarterback at North Carolina. I think I attended a few games. He was the starting quarterback for Carolina back then. But what are your memories of covering him back in the day?
He's a nice guy. He came in from Nebraska, and actually he was the first Nebraska quarterback, I think, to ever throw for 300 yards in a game, if I remember correctly. Mm-hmm. So people were really excited when he came because the idea, hey, it's a Nebraska guy. But as Max says, a lot of times kids transfer for a reason. He won the quarterback job at Carolina. They were rotating a little bit. That was just during a period, the end of the John Bunting era, where the Tar Heels were obviously not very good, or it wouldn't have been the end of the John Bunting era. He was an okay player. He was a big-time competitor. And when he moved to wide receiver his last year, he spent 2 years as a player at Carolina. I think he had a redshirt year as well as a transfer. One of the reasons he made that move was because he wanted to get into coaching, and he needed to go learn a position and learn a different position. So now as a quarterback and as a wide receiver, well, you got a lot of the offense down right there. So smart kid, someone who I think was sort of a voice of the team during a difficult time and handled himself very well. And as I've followed his career professionally, I wouldn't be surprised if one day in a not so distant future, he gets a chance to be a head coach somewhere at the lower FBS level and could be a guy that we see in a Power 5, running a Power 5 program down the road. He's a smart guy. He's respected. He worked with Turner Gill at Liberty. Last year, he spent a year with Bob Davie at New Mexico. So he's been around. He's got a sample of a lot of stuff. And in fact, I think if you go back to college, we saw an interview of him last year, because when we ran that series, the best Tar Heel football or basketball player from each of the 50 states, he was our Nebraska rep because we had nobody else. And I'm like, well, he went to school there for 2 years. He got mail there, so he's from Nebraska in some way. But I think he had a stretch where 3 straight years or 4 straight years he played for different coaches. Mm-hmm. And so he's seen a lot, and he's a really good addition to Jeff Hafley's staff up there. And I hope he does well. He was an enjoyable kid to cover.
Let me ask you this real quick about him, just to stay on him for a second. When you covered him, did you, from talking to him and kind of being around him, did you kind of get the vibe that he would maybe be a coach in the future? Did he kind of have that aura about him?
Yeah, he talked about it. Mm-hmm. When he made that move to wide receiver, he mentioned that as one of the reasons. Look, I want to get into coaching, and I want to learn as much about this sport as I can. So that was one of the reasons he did that. Plus, he was a team guy. You know, they had TJ Yates. They had what they needed there. So he's like, yeah, okay, I'm going to go play wide receiver. I'm going to learn this. Total team guy. Like I said, he's got all the tools to be a head coach one day, and it would not surprise me if he ends up as a head coach in the next several years.
Deana, to focus on John Lamont real quick before we move to the next segment, do you have any more memories of his recruitment and kind of how that went down? Did you cover that at all? And when he was before he committed to Boston College?
Well, you know, a kid like John, who he probably had local offers, you know, from the schools, in-state offers, and it kind of shocked me that he went up north because Boston College is nice trip from the Alamance, Burlington area. So it was kind of shocking, but there's been some North Carolina kids go up. Kyron Bowman, he was a UNC football commit that he decommitted, wanted to focus more on basketball, and he went up to BC and played basketball. Now he's in the NBA. So it was kind of shocking that he picked Boston College, but obviously he had a very good reason to go up there. A very smart kid, as he is a graduate student. So I'm sure he may have multiple degrees now.
Yeah.
Not a bad place to get multiple degrees from.
Yeah, I was about to say, a great institution in terms of that, especially. But, guys, that's going to do it for us in this segment. Next up, we've got Andy Backstrom from EagleAction.com coming on to talk a little bit about the Eagles, preview that game coming up, and here's what he had to say about it.
All right, welcome back to our special segment where we bring in someone to discuss the Tar Heels' opponent for that week, and we go to Andy Backstrom, who covers BC for EagleAction.com, which is in the Rivals Network. You can follow Andy at Andy Backstrom on Twitter. And Andy, welcome aboard. Welcome to our podcast. I'm looking forward to going up to BC. Crazy thing, I've been doing this for 25 years, and I've never covered a football game at BC. I've covered basketball games, but because of the way the crazy ACC schedule goes, I've actually never been inside alumni stadiums. I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks for having me on, guys. Yeah, no, that's a great opportunity. I mean, the two teams haven't played since 2013, and it's just such a weird situation with the Coastal being thrown into the Atlantic for this weird season, but it's a good opportunity for the two teams to meet, and it's a nice clash of a very young coach in Jeff Hafley and a very experienced coach in Mack Brown.
Well, it's a good segue. Mack Brown has talked very positively about Jeff Hafley this week, including Wednesday morning after practice. They have not met before, but as long as Mack's been in the business, he knows a lot of people who know a lot of people. So he's been able to get the goods on Jeff Hafley. From your experience, what can you tell us about what he's been able to do for that program and how the culture of the program is changing?
Oh, it's astronomical. I mean, with Steve Adazio, he was there for 7 years, and while he was able to do some things in recruiting, the winning just wasn't there. I mean, the team was stuck at a 7-win mark for quite a while. He finished 44-44 overall, was 1-17 against top 25 teams. So by the end of his tenure, there needed to be a change, and Martin Jarman, the AD at the time, who's now at UCLA, brought in Hafley, was co-defense coordinator at Ohio State, but it's really just been the energy that he's brought to Boston College. Just even the first month he was at BC, he was at a hockey game, the BC BU hockey game, which is known as probably one of the best events to go to if you're a BC student. He went out after one of the periods and gave a speech about the program, how everyone needed to get in and get on board what he was doing. And that's really when people saw the kind of energy, the palpable, excitement that Jeff Hafley could bring, and people really just, attached to that. And before he even coached a game, they loved him because of everything he was doing with recruiting. The 2021 recruiting class is already ranked 28th nationally, which is better than BC's been doing in recent years. And also now that they've seen him coach a few games, he's been making halftime adjustments, and he's been, most importantly, taking ownership for things, which is a lot of people didn't see Adazio do.
So the comeback win over Texas Tech, I watched the game, and they showed him a lot on the sideline. And for a young coach in his second game to be facing what I would think is a pretty stressful situation, down 21-7 at home, even with nobody in the stands, but you're playing Texas State, a team that you're supposed to beat. You're supposed to maybe beat convincingly. Yet they score 17 unanswered points to close it out, 10 points in the last minute plus. What does that say about him and the way he was able to rally those guys to be able to do that, especially with a new quarterback?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's a game BC wins last year. I think this is a different kind of energy. And I think during the week, it was really interesting to see Jeff Hafley talk about Texas State. It wasn't, we're just got to take this 1 week at a time. It wasn't coach speak of, we got to take them seriously. It was real. He was very convincingly saying this Texas State team could give us a threat. And he told his guys, this game's going to go to the fourth quarter, even before it started. And that's what we saw happen. And I think he's able to make halftime adjustments, which is something that a lot of people didn't know what he would do. I mean, this is his first year as a head coach, but I think we saw BC really shift into that short to intermediate passing game into the second half, and especially the fourth quarter. Phil Jokovic, the transfer quarterback from Notre Dame, was 12 of his last 14 passes. So really got in a rhythm there at the end, and they scored 10 points in the final 71 seconds of regulation.
Andy, you talked about for Phil Jokovic. That was another great segue by you. I was just about to ask you about him. Obviously transferring in this year. I know BC struggled a little bit at times through the first couple games to move the ball. But what have you seen from him so far and Jokovic? And do you have any indication of how the coaching staff feels about his progress so far?
Yeah, I mean, Phil is really progressing just the way the coaching staff wants. So he works a lot with the offensive coordinator, Frank Cignetti Jr., who came in this year with the new staff. And, he won an off-season quarterback battle between him and Dennis Grosel, who was the incumbent starter, a former walk-on actually, but started the final 7 games last year after Anthony Brown went out for the year. So there was a quarterback battle. There was competition. That's how Jeff Hafley wants to build this team. But Jokovic, he's had struggles in the first half, and it hasn't been pretty at times. He's been stepping up into pressure. He's been forcing throws into double coverage. He's been strong-arming some passes downfield. But I think, the way Jeff Hafley says it, he's a rookie. I mean, he really, is basically a freshman. He's a redshirt sophomore, but he sat 2 years behind Ian Book in Notre Dame. And, he threw 18 total passes in those 2 seasons. So this is really his first taste of real football at the collegiate level. Mm-hmm. And I think you're going to see those growing pains. But, yeah, in the second half, he's been a different player. And Hafley even said, we got to just tell him that it's the fourth quarter when it's the first quarter, so we actually get those points on the board. But, yeah, no, I mean, I think the big thing for Phil is just not taking negative plays. I think that's especially for North Carolina, has a great pass rush. We saw that against Syracuse. If he steps up into pressure, if he tries to extend plays that aren't there, he could end up in some pretty big trouble this week.
When you look at the numbers of what BC's done offensively, especially against Texas State, 297 yards against a team that was giving up almost 500 to what you would think is much lesser competition. Is that more related to the growing pains you're talking about, or is there something else there that's troubling for BC moving forward?
Yeah, the biggest thing's been the run game. I mean, people talk about Boston College, and they always think, oh, they're going to run the football. They're going to pound it down your throat. And that's what it was with Steve Adazio. It was a lot of 12 personnel, 2 tight ends, line up, and let's just push the ball down their other team's throat. And that's not what we've seen so far. I mean, BC is averaging 85.5 rushing yards per game, which is, I think, the 7th worst rushing attack in the country right now. David Bailey was a guy who a lot of people thought was going to replicate the stats of A.J. Dillon because he averaged 5.7 yards per carry last year, which is just insane. And he was really a great 1B option at the position, but he hasn't gotten a lot of opportunities. Travis Levy, the scat back return man they have, actually had more rushing attempts than him last week, and he's healthy. So the thing is, it's a different kind of approach with this offense. It's a lot more passing. A lot of it's built off the play action, but it's like some screen passes. It's short to intermediate throws. The running game just hasn't been there, and a lot of it's because of the O-line. I think they've shook up the O-line quite a bit. Even though they returned 4 all-ACC guys on the O-line, they moved a lot of parts around. So basically, you have their best O-lineman, Zion Johnson. He moved from left guard to left tackle. Tyler Vrabel moved from left tackle to right tackle. Ben Petrullo went from right tackle to right guard. So, yeah, a lot of moving parts, even though they had guys coming back. And the chemistry just hasn't quite been there yet. They've given up 8 sacks in 2 games. They gave up 13 sacks all last year. And, again, yeah, the running game just hasn't quite been there yet. But Hafley still is confident that they'll get that back on track. And, the team just is different. It's a different staff. It's a different mindset.
When you have those issues, how huge is it to have a tight end like Hunter Long, who looks – I know he had like maybe 30 receptions last year, but he looks like an NFL guy to me. He's got, I think, 16 receptions through the first 2 games. I was breaking down the numbers. I think he has 37% of their receptions through the first 2 games, and he looks the part, man.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to watch one thing, Hunter Long is Phil Jokovic's security blanket. I think you're going to see that on Saturday. He's a guy that, always going to be there, whether it's the middle of the field, on the perimeter. Yeah, he's an NFL guy. I mean, he definitely is. And I think he's getting the targets that everyone kind of expected him to get early on in his career. And I think just the way BC's offense was built, there used to be a lot more guys in that tight end room, a lot of different outlets. And now he is the guy. I mean, there's Spencer Witter, who's the second string tight end, but Hunter Long is a guy that's going to get 5, 6, 7, 8 targets per game at least. And yeah, as you said, 16 catches through 2 games. Before this year, he never had more than 4 catches in a game. So just a big breakout year for him. And I think he's poised for great things. And also, Jeff Hafley always talks about he blocks, and that's a big thing. And he's a pass catching guy, but you go to the next level, you got to be able to do both. And that's one thing we've seen from him so far this year.
On the other side of the ball, last question for you. Defensively, they look pretty solid. The Carolina kids are talking about how physical this team is from what they've seen on film. And if you look at the numbers, I think they have 7 sacks and 22 quarterback hurries through 2 games. So they're able to make quarterbacks move. What have they done that's been effective there?
Yeah, that's the biggest difference defensively. Last year, they had the 2nd worst pass rush in the ACC, which wasn't characteristic of BC because you think of guys like Harold Landry, and, Wyatt Ray, Zach Allen, guys who have gotten NFL opportunities. But without those guys, the D-line wasn't great last year. But this year, they've added some transfers. You got Luke Beckett, a defensive tackle from Cal, a guy they brought in basically at the end of training camp because the Pac-12 canceled. Was looking for an opportunity, came to BC. Another guy is Shabuzi Onwuka. He's from Buffalo. Another big guy in the middle. And then they just added Maximilian Roberts, a guy from Maine, who literally they announced him an hour before the Texas State game and came in, had 5 tackles and 1.5 sacks. So they've been just adding guys, a lot of different veteran pieces up front. And I think you also have Marcus Valdez shed 7 pounds of weight this offseason, and he's really been fast off the edge, kind of an undersized guy, but great with technique. So they've just really revamped that pass rush. And I think that's something that you'll see going forward.
Looking forward to seeing this. It's just like watching Georgia Tech sort of change. It's code, if you will. BC's obviously doing that a little bit, and that's kind of fun to watch. And I think it's interesting. I guess I'll throw one last question in there for you. When you mentioned Adazio going 44 and 44, what is the standard there? What do they believe should be the minimum standard at BC?
Yeah, I think they want to contend for ACC championships. That's what it is. When BC first joined the ACC in 2005, it didn't take long to be contending. You had Matt Ryan there, and things were great, not only in football, but also in basketball. You're thinking of the Jared Dudley era too, and they were doing great things in the ACC, and then you kind of had that slow decline, and now we are where we are. And it's really a big thing just about BC's expectations of being able to contend for a championship. You bring in a guy like Jeff Hafley, who is, a couple plays away from a national championship with Ohio State. And I think that's the kind of mindset you got to have with a program that's trying to rebuild, that doesn't necessarily have the facilities or the location that's desirable for a lot of these ACC athletes, but being in a place where you say, you know what, we're going to be the underdog and we're going to have a chance to win. And I think that's really a big piece in why Hafley's here and why he's doing what he's doing.
Andy Backstrom from EagleAction.com here on the Rivals.com network. Check out his work up there. They do a really good job. That site's really, really humming right now. I've enjoyed checking out your work. You and Justin doing a really good job up there. So all Carolina fans, go to EagleAction.com. You can go to our site and click teams, hit the ACC and go up and hit BC, and takes you right to their site. You can check out all of his work, and you can also follow him on Twitter at Andy Backstrom. Thanks for coming by, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, guys. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks, Andy. Awesome stuff there from Andy. Really appreciate him taking the time out of his busy day to hop on here and talk to us a little bit about Boston College football. AJ, I thought it was interesting. It didn't happen on camera, but you brought this up before we went on with him. You've actually never covered a college football game at Boston College. I know you've covered plenty of games in contact form, but I found that interesting. We've had so many, long road trips where we've talked about your journeys through the journalism world over the past 25 years, and I had no idea that was really interesting for me to hear.
Well, think about it. When I was with the Star News, they sent me quite a few places, but not everywhere. Mm-hmm. And there was really no big game up in Boston that any of the in-state schools played when I left the Star News in summer of 2008, I guess it was. And then at Fox, they didn't send me up there because by the time I got to Fox, BC wasn't very good. They weren't all that relevant. And most of the stuff I focused on at Fox was here in North Carolina, Virginia Tech, and Clemson, and a little bit of and a decent amount of Florida State. So I've been up there for basketball, and the football stadium and basketball arena are basically connected. So it's right there. There's a Flutie statue in between, which I can't wait to text you guys photos of because it's really cool. But I've actually never been inside BC's football stadium. I've stood next to it, freezing, waiting for Ubers, but I've actually never been inside. So I'm really looking forward to it. I still count. I count the stadiums I've been in. I count the airports I've been in. I count the arenas I've been in. I count the number of different teams I've seen in person for both sports. And this will be the next notch on my football stadium belt.
Between the, Carolina having not played in 3 weeks and the fact that you haven't covered a road game in forever and first time in that stadium, are you kind of like a kid, like first day of school, kind of just raring and ready to go this weekend? It's got to be pretty exciting for you to get back up there.
You've known me for a couple of years now. I bet you can answer that question.
Yeah, I think I know the answer, but I had to make sure.
I'm climbing the walls. I do this because it's my passion. And I couldn't imagine doing anything else, Jacob.
Oh,
and yeah, I'm very excited. I'm not looking forward to wearing a mask on an airplane or in an airport. I'm not looking forward to that, but that's what everyone else is dealing with. So it's not like I'm special and don't have to do it. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing a new stadium. I can't wait to get in there and get a feel for the concourse. I just wish the fans were going to be there because I love going on the road and looking at atmospheres. One of my favorite trips I've taken since I took over this job was when 2016, Carolina opened the season against Georgia down in Atlanta. And a week later, they were at Illinois. And the massive tailgating, that was their first sellout at Illinois in a while for a non-conference game. And it was a great atmosphere where I was in the press box. The band was in the end zone down to my left, and they were loud. It was a lot of pageantry there. I got off the elevator in the press box, and a guy greeted us dressed like, I guess, Bronco Nagurski, one of the greats from like the 20s, wearing like a uniform from back then. They have a nice cult. They have a nice history in Illinois, and that was a really neat trip. A long time ago, Arizona State was a really neat trip when Carolina played there. I think some fans might remember Darian Durant, Chesley Borders just lit up the scoreboard that night. And I got locked in the Sun Devil Stadium afterward. Didn't get out until 2 hours before my flight left.
Not the first time you've been locked in a stadium.
No, I've been locked there. I got locked into Scott Stadium at UVA. Got locked into Madison Square Garden after the big preseason NIT one year. And it's, as my dad says, save it for the book.
Exactly.
And I'm looking forward to going up there. And I just wish that their full culture would be on display because I love the fact that every school you go to really does have a different culture. They have a different university culture and a different sports culture. And I was really looking forward to seeing BC's football culture. But it is what it is.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I got to kind of travel to my first, true road games last year with going up to Blacksburg and Atlanta to see Georgia Tech. And it's just so cool to kind of be there on game days. But, the problem is, like you mentioned, you don't have fans there, and that just takes so much away from it. So, AJ, what are you about to – go ahead.
No, well, I mean, we're all getting used to that now.
Yeah.
It wasn't as weird this past weekend watching games with just a few fans, or in the ACC, basically nobody anywhere except a couple at Miami. And in the end, it's the game. Once the game's being played, unless the fans are super loud, like in press boxes, you don't even hear the fans a lot.
No, not at all.
In Illinois, that's one of the cool things there. You could actually hear them. Georgia Tech, you went to last year, they have open air press box. You're going to go to Virginia, maybe. It depends on how many credentials they give out. But Virginia has an open air press box. Syracuse is in a dome, so it's open air. And it's really loud when you're in those situations. But in traditional press boxes, it's so insulated, you can barely hear anyway. So to me, it's the buzz. You and I walking up to Bobby Dodd Stadium last year at Georgia Tech, we had like a mile walk from where we parked.
Oh, yeah.
Wasn't that one of the coolest things about the trip?
It was amazing.
Soaking all the tailgating in, people walking around with open containers and the pageantry of what they're wearing, mascots. In fact, the Georgia Tech cheerleaders and band were in some quad somewhere playing and doing stuff. And they do that a lot at Georgia Tech outside the stadium before the game, which is one of my favorite parts about it.
Yeah, that was one thing when I got in the industry. I hadn't really thought about it, just kind of visiting these new venues. And, I mean, you get to see the new stadium, but there's so much more that goes on just besides the game. I mean, it's the pregame, it's the postgame, it's walking around campus. I mean, it's just it's unfortunate that we won't really, at least right now, we're not able to kind of get that, especially with the fans and all that. It's just unfortunate. That just is what it is, what you're going to do about it. So
hopefully order will be restored soon. I have no idea what the heck soon means, but hopefully it will be, and I want you to have more of these experiences too. So right now there's limited credentials everywhere. The press boxes they're only filling 25% of the press boxes. So there's only going to be a few people that cover North Carolina that are going to be on the road covering this game, and that'll be that way for the closer road games. UVA is going to be like that as well. So just roll with it, man. I just hope I get in each week. We've gone everywhere Carolina's been since I've taken this job. Missed a couple of basketball games because I was sick. And then sometimes there's a conflict with football, and it's early season basketball. And I have chosen the NC State football game, cover that over some basketball stuff. But otherwise, everywhere they go, we go. So hopefully that streak will continue.
Exactly. Well, guys, if you want to see what Alumni Field looks like on Saturday, I know AJ's all over the Twitter. It's his first time at the stadium, too, so I'm sure he'll be taking plenty of pictures from the press box. And I'm sure you'll throw that picture of that Flutie statue up as well on Twitter. I'm sure the people
I'm going to be video sharing with you up the
I know
wazoo
you
before I'm going to do as much pregame stuff on my camera as I can. So you'll then make it look pretty. You'll make all my crappy video work look moderately palatable.
Nah, yeah, you're better than you give yourself credit for, it, you know. Well, that's going to do it for us on the THI Football Preview Podcast. Really enjoyed having Deana on here earlier. Really enjoyed having Andy on here as well. 3:30 kickoff this Saturday. Carolina taking Boston College on at Alumni Field. Going to be an exciting one. And, you know, I know it's still early in the week right now, but hopefully we actually see a football game this week. And as of right now, we're good to go. But, you know, hopefully we'll actually see one. So fingers crossed, right? But that's going to do it for us, guys. Be sure to check out TarHeelIllustrated.com. Be sure to subscribe to us right here on YouTube at Tar Heel Illustrated. And see you in the next one, guys. Thanks.
Thanks.